Welcome back to the Barbell Medicine Podcast. I'm Dr. Jordan Feigenbaum. This is a special preview of our Barbell Medicine Plus direct line. It's our monthly exclusive subscriber-only Ask Us Anything, where we move past the basics and dive into the technical nuance that defines the Barbell Medicine Plus experience. And right now, we're running a 25% off promotion for our Plus annual membership, which gives you access to our full library of research-based action plans, exclusive audio series, and these monthly deep dive Q&A sessions, plus additional discounts on our products and services. Sale ends this Sunday at midnight Pacific time, and you can subscribe by checking out the link in the description below. To start today's podcast, we are going to begin by challenging a common belief in the fitness industry, the idea that muscle imbalances are a reliable predictor of pain and injury risk. Here we explain why asymmetry is often a functional adaptation rather than a clinical problem, a feature, not a bug, and how a better understanding of the normal versus the pathological may change your approach. Let's get into it. Do muscle imbalances reliably predict pain and/or injury risk? And how should coaches manage clients who dogmatically believe in these models? Oof, a lot of stuff here. Yeah, we'll go through it piecemeal, starting first with the basic premise, like, do muscle imbalances reliably predict pain and or injury risk? And I think one way to look at this is kind of thinking about the differences between the normal and the pathological. So how would you differentiate between something that is, quote, normal and something that is pathological insofar as it either is representative of an injury or causing pain, something like that, versus a adaptation that we see in response to either exercise or in some cases even disuse, right? Lack of exercise. And when we think about this, or at least when I think about this through the lens of asymmetry, I don't think that human bodies are naturally symmetrical. You know, you think about everything from like the muscle size from, agonist antagonist pairings, and even the muscular strength, like quadriceps are stronger than hamstrings. Calves are stronger than your tibialis anterior and the muscles on the front of your lower limb. Your triceps are stronger than your biceps. And so they're not symmetrical, like on either side of a joint, for example. So when people say, there's an asymmetry, is it side to side? What they're talking about, is it really agonist-antagonist pairing? The literature is littered with examples of athletes across the compendium, novice to elite levels, that have massive, quote, imbalances in not only muscle size, but also anatomical features that you could see on like X-ray, for example, on their dominant side. Tennis players, their dominant serving arm tends to be longer than their non-dominant arm. If you look at rotational sport athletes, I'm thinking about like not only cricket players, but also like rowers. Mm-hmm. You look at like their vertebral features on one side. You look at vertebral features in weightlifters. They have thickened vertebral end plates and thicker cruciate ligaments in the knees. These are all, quote, abnormal if you were to just see them on imaging, and they may not be the same side to side, but they're features, not bugs. And so I think if that's your base understanding of like, should things be symmetrical front to back or side to side? Generally not. It's not consistent with like the human experience, but people can have pain despite all of this, right? Just like people can be asymptomatic despite being, quote, asymmetrical. So I think if I were really going to try to answer this very simply, I don't care about asymmetry that much, whether it's side to side or like an agonist-antagonist pairing. In most cases, where I do start caring is either post-operatively or post-traumatic injury. I'm thinking about somebody who had an ACL repair or somebody who, tore a hamstring, something like that. And then, side to side, there's a huge difference in hamstring strength or lower extremity strength otherwise. And at that point, you're thinking, we probably do need to do some specific work to shore that up. But outside of that sort of setting, either post-op or post-traumatic injury, rupture, tear, something like that, I just don't care. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Based on what you have described, I'm imagining kind of three different trajectories that you can imagine people falling on, and the amount to which their asymmetry, presumably in many of these situations, it's side to side. How much it matters depends on which of these trajectories you fall. One is it is a inherent asymmetry to you. Like in general, one side might be a bit stronger or formed in a different way compared with the other, and it's always been that way. In those situations, when you choose to engage in a particular activity or sport, starting out with that basic asymmetry, it will either tend to maybe improve a little bit depending on the demands of the task, or you will adapt to be able to perform the task with your asymmetry in place. So it is a long-standing, pre-existing sort of thing. You will either adapt one way or another, and it generally is not going to be a problematic thing for most people. The other situation that you described is maybe some of those kind of single-sided sport athletes, maybe they were actually started out more symmetrical before they engaged in the sport. And then the more of the sport they did, be it baseball pitching, they tend to usually throw with one arm, or tennis players, or, other racket sports, or rowers like our buddy, Dr. Miles, who only spent his life turning in one side of a boat, and he has thoracic rotation much more in one way than the other. That is an acquired asymmetry, meaning over a longer period of time, that kind of coincided with the adaptation to the sport. That also tends to not be super problematic. Mm-hmm. The last trajectory, where symmetry and asymmetry tends to be more of an important consideration, is one where it is an acquired asymmetry, but it is much more abruptly acquired, right? Mm-hmm. It is not one that was long-standing before you ever entered the sport, nor was it one that you gradually acquired as you participated in the sport, but rather it was a more abrupt acquisition, meaning you suddenly had surgery and now you're asymmetric side to side, or you had a traumatic injury and now you're asymmetric side to side, or you had a fracture or a neurological injury and now you have, differences in limb lengths or movement patterns or something else that you have not had years of existing with and exposure to and training with to adapt to or to develop as a natural course of your adaptation. So that's kind of the way that I'm framing this, is maybe there's something to this idea in terms of the how quickly it was acquired. And acutely acquired asymmetry may have more of a risk of too much too soon and then subsequent pain, whereas one that was either long-standing, pre-existing, will generally be much less likely to be problematic. And one that you acquire through the course of your training and performance is also unlikely to be problematic. And so we do have some material on this if you're interested, for example, I think Derek's article is titled something to the effect of when symmetry matters on our site. And it really is focused around, for example, his, pet topic of ACL and postoperative rehab. But that's kind of the way that I think both of us are thinking about this, to where if somebody is experiencing some pain, for example, or an injury, and there was not anything else abrupt or acute about any of these changes, but we simply incidentally find some side-to-side differences that have probably been there for a long time or all along, or have probably were even there before they even started lifting or participating in the activity, we're less likely to put a ton of attention on that compared with if they never had any issues, never had any pain, and then, I got in this car crash and fractured my femur, and after surgery, my left leg is now 2 inches shorter than my right because of the way the surgery was done, which I have questions about that surgery. And now I'm experiencing, your mechanics are much more acutely different, and it is much more, your threshold or your tolerance, the too much too soon, is much easier to hit when you have not been long-term exposed and adapted to that asymmetry in the same way. So hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah. So as far as how to deal with this, one, what if you're dealing with somebody who is firmly entrenched in this asymmetry, debate? They really think that if someone is asymmetrical, either side to side or between, various strengths of muscle groups, that's what's causing pain and injury risk. I think you should be respectful, generally speaking, good advice, but also just ask for the evidence to support that. And you can, weigh the veracity and the how that evidence was collected and generated, and see if that makes sense to you. People are going to talk about upper cross syndrome, lower cross syndrome, a bunch of Janda stuff, and the evidence on that is just made up shenanigans. You can observe things and then not necessarily prove that they have caused the end effect. We see that all the time. So that's for dealing with the experts. Just ask for evidence, roll that around in your head, and generally speaking, it's nice to at least know where other people are coming from, so you can kind of better appreciate their perspective, and further some people that you might come in contact with professionally in the future, their perspectives. As far as clients go, this goes all back to communication styles. I think validating how people feel initially right off the bat sort of helps build that rapport. So, you can say things like, it's very common to feel tight weak in a particular area, especially when you're in pain. However, we know that from looking at thousands of people that these differences are actually a normal part of being human, and you're just more sensitive right now. So that's some reassurance there as well. You're not out of alignment right now. You're just sensitive, things like that. You could also mention, instead of worrying that your left side matches your right side perfectly, let's focus on making both sides stronger. And that's typically the approach I like to use, where the squeaky wheel, so to speak, is going to get the grease. If your right leg is not as strong as your left leg and you're doing split squats, for example, the right leg is going to get a different training stimulus than the left leg. And this is more for like long-standing sort of asymmetries, whereas the surgical stuff, you'll need some different loading. Doesn't mean the exercise is something you can't use. And most importantly, so as not to alienate the person who's in front of you, is don't argue with them. Between moving into a new house, managing the business, and keeping up with my own training, my schedule is pretty much a disaster right now. For me, I realized that cooking healthy meals just wasn't going to happen when I found myself finishing a long day and realizing I still had an hour of prep and cleanup ahead of me. Look, you want to eat better, and when you have zero time and energy, Factor solves the problem. 2 minutes, real food, and you're done. It's not that you're failing at healthy eating, you're just failing at having extra hours in the day. Factor makes it super easy. All of their meals are made by chefs and designed by dietitians, and then they're delivered right to your door. We're talking about lean proteins, colorful vegetables, and healthy fats with no added sugars. I've been leaning on the Muscle Pro collection as it fits my needs as someone doing a lot of training. They also have high protein options, vegetarian options, and a ton of other different dietary patterns too. Any way you slice it, all of their meals are fresh, never frozen, and the food is ready in minutes. It's super easy to stay on track. Factor. Head over to factormeals.com/BBM50 off and use code BBM50 off to get 50% off your first Factor box plus free breakfast for an entire year. The offer is only valid for new Factor customers with code and qualifying auto-renewing subscription purchase. Make healthier eating easier with Factor. That's factormeals.com/BBM50 off. If you spend any time following Barbell Medicine, you know that we don't recommend things just because they have a popular logo. We look at the evidence, plus our experience. And our experience with standard issue hospital scrubs is actually not so good. Most of the time, you're wearing something that fits like a repurposed parachute and feels about as soft as 400 grit sandpaper. Needless to say, we were excited when Figs came on board to sponsor our podcast. They realized healthcare workers are basically athletes who just happen to be doing rounds instead of marathon sessions in the gym. These are lightweight, they handle endless laundry cycles without falling apart, and they're antimicrobial. That last part is key because, as we all know, hospitals can be a bit of a biohazard. They also finally moved past the era of boxy, scratchy scrubs. These are actually tailored so you don't look like you're walking around in a big blue cardboard box. They also have a new collab with New Balance for footwear and compression socks for those 14-hour shifts where your legs are starting to feel like lead weights. They even have outerwear for when the hospital administration decides to turn the ICU into a walk-in freezer. If you want to upgrade your work gear, Figs is giving you 15% off your first order. Head over to wearfigs.com and use the code FIGSRX at checkout. That's wearfigs.com, code FIGSRX for 15% off. Your patients might not notice the tailoring, but your mirrors definitely will. We talk a lot about efficiency and high yield results in training, and your wardrobe should follow the same logic. A well-built wardrobe is about pieces that work together and hold up over time, and that's what Quince does best. Premium materials, thoughtful design, and everyday staples that feel easy to wear and easy to rely on, even as the weather changes. Quince has everyday essentials I love with quality that lasts, from organic cotton sweaters and polos for every occasion to lighter jackets for the changing seasons. The secret is that they work directly with top factories and cut out the middlemen, so you're not paying for a massive brand markup. You're just getting quality clothing, and everything is built to hold up to daily wear and still look good season after season. Plus, they only partner with factories that meet rigorous standards for craftsmanship and ethical production. We've recently had some cooler weather in Southern California, so I've been rotating through a few of their cashmere sweaters and their jackets if I'm going somewhere else besides the gym. They look great, and they've been holding up way better than others I bought that cost way more, so for me, it's a no-brainer. Refresh your wardrobe with Quince. Go to quince.com/BBM for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. Now available in Canada too. That's QUINCE.com/BBM. Free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/BBM.
I've got good news and bad news. Here's the bad news. Most protein bars are packed with sugar and unpronounceable ingredients. The good news? There's a better option. I'm Will, and I created IQ Bar plant protein bars to empower doers like you with clean, delicious, low-sugar brain and body fuel. IQ bars are packed with 12 grams of protein, brain nutrients like magnesium and lion's mane, and zero weird stuff. And right now, you can get 20% off all IQ Bar products plus free shipping. Try our delicious IQ Bar Sampler pack with 7 plant protein bars, 4 hydration mixes, and 4 enhanced coffee sticks. Clean ingredients, amazing taste, and you'll love how you feel. Refuel smarter, hydrate harder, caffeinate larger with IQ Bar.
Go to eatiqbar.com and enter code BAR20 to get 20% off all IQ Bar products plus free shipping. Again, go to eatiqbar.com and enter code BAR20.
Pretty interesting, right? Okay, well, understanding the mechanics of the body and how it adapts is important for coaching. Knowledge of what's going on under the hood or inside the body is important for long-term health outcomes. In the next segment, we're shifting away from the way our muscles look and work to the way our blood chemistry responds to nutrition and lifestyle. In this next segment, we're looking at the intersection of saturated fat, red meat, and the often misunderstood lean mass hyperresponder phenotype. Let's take a look at the evidence and go beyond the trending headlines. Next question. Is limiting red meat and saturated fat necessary for someone who has otherwise optimal health metrics and a high fiber, high activity lifestyle? This is an interesting question because I think the crux of the question, the meat of the question, if you will, is, well, look, just how independently risky is red meat or are red meat and saturated fat? And to that, I would say it depends how much you're eating of it and what does the rest of the diet look like? I mean, so it depends, which is not a satisfying answer. So maybe let's back up a second. I think when you compare these, different dietary patterns, things that are rich in red meat and higher in saturated fat to other dietary patterns, particularly those that are plant-based, and you just look at observational trials, studies. So where they look at different groups of people eating these ways over long periods of time, large sample sizes, you're going to see almost universally plant-based diets just win. They just win. And so, vegetarians, vegans, people who like that dietary pattern will say, see, look at the data. And on the one hand, they're correct, but not for the right reasons. Because a lot of that is picking up what we call like a healthy user bias. Generally speaking, people who eat more plant-based diets, not only, they just tend to be fundamentally different from those who eat a diet that's high in red meat. They tend to exercise more. They tend to eat more dietary fiber, obviously, but they also tend to be more health conscious, generally speaking. Go to the doctor's office. Eating a plant-based diet also tends to cost more. So socioeconomic status differences, you can keep going down the line. There's just fundamental differences between the two, avatars that we're comparing here at the level of observational data. So most of the health differences that you're seeing, in those types of studies are just because the dietary patterns are so fundamentally different that's what they're picking up, and likely from a lot of other things that aren't just related to the dietary pattern as well. I think this question is more like, well, yeah, so let's eliminate all of that. And let's say in this particular case, the person eating red meat and a diet that's high in saturated fat, but everything else is optimized. Well, that doesn't absolve you from the risk of elevated, atherogenic load, so LDL cholesterol particles, apolipoprotein B containing particles. And I think we just have really good evidence suggesting that if those levels are elevated, making changes to lower them would generally reduce risk of heart disease. And so, I think that's the most simple answer to this. It's like, yeah, having everything else optimized, you're certainly in a better place than if they weren't, but you could probably get a little bit more optimized for some individuals if their apolipoprotein B test was high, for example, or if they had other additional risk factors or maybe not as modifiable, like elevated lipoprotein little a, family history of heart disease, where you'd want to be more aggressive potentially. I don't know. Is that how you think about this?
In a sense, I think that, the way this question is framed is limiting it, quote, necessary. And that idea of is it necessary really is something that requires the context of what are the person's goals? Are they one of these folks who you're describing as like wanting to optimize everything? To which I have several other questions. For example, like, do you drink any amount of alcohol?
Yeah.
Because like if all of this other stuff is perfect and that's your last question, it's like, well, some of these other behaviors still might confer greater risk. The other way that I'm thinking about this is you're right, that by and large, the overwhelming body of evidence would suggest that continuing to substitute, the red meats and animal-derived saturated fats for plant-derived protein sources and things like that is consistently likely to confer health improvements or benefits compared with going in the other direction. There is, if it was just all correlational, it was all just messy, then you would see at least some weighting of evidence also going in the other direction among these healthy people. But pretty consistently, we see in various lines of evidence that substituting out those animal-derived saturated fats and red meats for plant-derived protein sources, pretty consistent signal in the direction of health benefit. And so I think that the more of that somebody is willing to do, the more benefit they are likely to derive. Although, as with most other things here, that benefit has diminishing returns. Right. Mm-hmm. So if somebody is eating a ribeye a day, then substituting one of those out for something else is likely to give them, a pretty substantial risk reduction. And then for each one from then on, all the way down to one a week or half a serving a week or a quarter serving a week or an eighth of a serving a week, the incremental risk reduction that they get at those levels is less and less and less. And so I think it is probably uncontroversial between either of us and for many folks who are in our orbit to say that fatty red meats should not be a predominant element in your habitual dietary pattern. Mm-hmm. If somebody is choosing to consume it on an occasional basis and they do not have any evidence of untoward health consequences like elevated blood lipids or other factors like that, then are they accepting some degree of risk compared with if they chose to substitute that out for salmon, for example? I would say, yes, it would probably be better if they were to substitute it for salmon. How much better? It might not be enough to make them motivated to do that just because of their preferences or their cultural, food habits and things like that. In the same way that when we talk about, is a cholesterol lowering medicine likely to lower your risk? Yes, that is actually the case for 100% of the population, essentially. Mm-hmm. But the actual amount of risk reduction is not equivalent for everyone across the board. It gives you a, say, 25-ish to 30% relative risk reduction. Relative risk reduction means it depends on where your starting risk is. So if your starting risk is very high, you enjoy more benefit, or you're more likely to benefit. If your starting risk is super low, you're less likely to benefit. And so I view this kind of similarly. It might be the case that all your levers are maximally pulled in your health, and you're like, hey, can I just have maybe a modest portion of a steak once a week or something like that? And I would say, well, what are your goals here? And if you want to I want to Brian Johnson this thing. I want to live forever or whatever. I'm like an aggressive optimizer. I'd say, yeah, I'd probably substitute that for something else. But if you're like, look, I'm doing as much as I'm willing to do to improve my health, and this brings me great joy, and whatever, trivial amount of risk it brings, I'm not concerned with, because, one other day of the week, I enjoy a glass of wine or something like that. It's like, okay, well, you have determined the amount of risk that you're willing to accept. Mm-hmm. If you really want to maximally pull every lever, you want to live, that type of life, then yeah, probably would look at substituting that out for something else.
Yeah. Yeah, there was an interesting paper that came out a few years ago where it was basically two experts arguing on either side of this, should we reduce the saturated fat target for Americans in the food guidelines? And, currently it's as far as your daily calories go, eat less than 10% of your daily calories from saturated fat. And on the pro side, arguing, yeah, we should keep that in there and maybe even consider lowering it. It's like, well, look, if people consumed less saturated fat, particularly from red meats, most people are going to have a favorable response in their blood lipid level, and that's going to favorably impact their, relative risk of cardiovascular disease. And on the other side, arguing against, they're like, well, look, the average intake as far as percentage of daily calories for saturated fat is 11%. So does it even need to be in there? Who cares? No one reads the guidelines anyway. Yeah, move on. Yeah. And so, there's two sides to that argument. I think to maybe clear this up and really summarize this, we can talk about this lean mass hyperresponder phenotype that's going around the interwebs. So this is a person who sees a significant rise in cholesterol, their blood lipids, following the adoption of a ketogenic or low carbohydrate diet. So the criteria that the people within that orbit that they say to be a lean mass hyperresponder, you don't actually have to be lean, but your LDL has to go up in response to a low carbohydrate diet to greater than 200 milligrams per deciliter and associated with an HDL cholesterol that's greater than 80 and triglycerides that are less than 70. So effectively what this is saying is like your LDL is elevated. That's the only thing that's weird about your standard lipid panel. Okay. And they're saying, look, if this is you and you're eating a low carbohydrate diet, you're at no increased risk of heart disease because your triglycerides are low, your HDL is high. This is just an aberrant sort of relationship due to the nature of you following a low carbohydrate diet. Unfortunately, evidence on this is not very supportive of that hypothesis. Like you would have to just say like, look, the LDL being increased, which we know carries apolipoprotein B, and that is a good representative test of your atherogenic load, which we know is like this time volume issue. The higher it's elevated, the longer it's elevated for, the higher the risk. You just have to say, nah, we're ignoring that in a specific case. Austin, what do you think about that?
I think it's a bold claim, and I'm not opposed to people making bold claims if they, as you often say, bring receipts. And to date, they lack hard human outcome based receipts. A lot of this is mechanistic kind of hypothesizing. They attempted to do this study that was popularized and went around the internet recently called the Keto CTA study that had a fair amount of problems with it and led to some egg on their face, I think, based on the speed of plaque development in people who fit this phenotype. And so, yeah, this is an area where I have actually found it pretty straightforward to not get terribly worked up about it, mainly because of the types of people who end up in this space. The people who end up in that orbit that you describe and subscribing to that view, they are people who generally are going to be pretty skeptical of a lot of medical advice, pretty contrarian in general. They are often heavy motivated reasoners in terms of trying to find ways to think about things that justifies their existing dietary patterns. And cool, like, it's your risk, it's not mine. I come back to this often of like, here's my advice. You're free to take my advice, or if you want to go someplace else for someone else's advice, like, good luck. Hope it works out for you. Most people in that situation may well do perfectly fine because you have a lot of other health things going in your favor. You don't have the atherogenic dyslipidemia phenotype where you have high LDL, high triglycerides, and very low HDL. That is no doubt a higher risk type, right? That is the worst type. That is the one associated with insulin resistance, diabetes, things like that. The claim they are making is not that phenotype, but if you have high LDL and the others, HDL, are high and triglycerides are low rather than the opposite, is that completely risk-free, or is it just lower risk than the worst case phenotype? That's where I would be interested to see data. If you can show that people who have this lipid phenotype are at essentially equivalent risk to somebody who has the same phenotype, but just with low LDL, that would be actually kind of groundbreaking evidence because it would be in opposition to, the vast majority of lipid data for the past century. So that's what I mean. Big claim needs some big evidence. And until that is until we have that big evidence, I'm not going to get too worked up about it. You can do what you want with your diet, your lifestyle. Good luck.
Yeah. Big if true.
Yeah.
I definitely think you would predict that a person with just isolated elevated LDL would be lower risk, but to say that it's no risk.
Exactly.
It's equivalent. It's saying like, look, a person with excess body fat and they're very fit and they're carrying a lot of muscle, they're at no increased risk of medical problems from excess body fat. And you're like, well, that's not true. They're at less risk than if they had less muscle mass, for example, or less fitness, but it doesn't absolve them of the risk of this well-characterized risk factor. Same thing with blood pressure. So you just keep going down the line. You would prefer everything to be optimized if you were an optimizer. And so I think to just tie this back in, it's like, should you limit red meat and saturated fat? It really just depends on how, what you're eating, how much of it you're eating, how that is affecting all of your risk factors and your, personal goals and like risk sort of tolerance. I think both of us would say that we're both tolerant of some risk related to red meat because we enjoy it. But if we were trying to maximize longevity, we would shift even further towards a more plant-based dietary pattern.
Yeah, that's true. And I think that reflects even the trajectory of my own dietary pattern over the past, decade or so. It has been progressively less of that over time and much more heavily in the other direction at this point. So
yeah. Okay, hopefully you found that as interesting as we did. Let's move on to the next segment. Now, analyzing blood lipids can give us a snapshot of our current cardiovascular risk, but to understand the effects of body composition on long-term health, we've got to look at how the body regulates its own weight and energy stores over decades. That brings us to the dual intervention point model. In this segment, which is admittedly my favorite, we break down the evolutionary biology of why the body defends certain levels of fat and weight, moving past the simplified view of energy balance and into the complex regulatory systems of the human body. In the dual intervention point model, does the body defend absolute scale weight or body fat percentage? So if you're not familiar with this dual intervention point model, this was suggested by a Dr. Speakman. He's one of the pillars in the research community regarding obesity, energy expenditure. Also now just recently did a study on GLP-1s and chondrocyte sort of stimulation at the level of the joint space. But this particular model is basically suggesting that human body weight and body fatness, he puts both of those things together, are regulated between two set points, one on the low end and one on the high end. On the low end, we're defending against sort of frailty, starvation, death. Effectively, if someone lost too much weight, too much body fat, their fitness for reproducing would be compromised. And on the high end, we're protecting against predation, being eaten by an animal, for example, because we can't move, can't avoid that. Ultimately, again, reducing fitness to reproduce. All right. And he extends that theory with some speculation. Admittedly, he caveats it appropriately. He's like, look, there's no more predation sort of pressure anymore. And so there's been a drift upwards, genetic drift upwards of body fat set points. Now, again, this is mostly speculative, but in this model, if somebody were approaching the lower threshold, their body would push back and reduce energy expenditure and increase energy intake to defend against going any lower. And at the upper end, the body would do the opposite. It would increase energy expenditure and lower energy intake to prevent the person from gaining any more weight and any more body fat. Okay. The idea is that over time, as our environment has changed, we've had a genetic drift upwards of both of these points. That's why we're getting fatter as globally for the most part. And that explains our response to the environment because it has changed to ultimately influence both of these set points. Still just a model. I think most of the stuff's genetically mediated, but yeah, that's his speculation. So in this model, the question asker asks, is this scale weight or body fat? And in the model, as it's presented by Dr. Speakman, it says both. But the major regulator here, I would have to say, is probably body fat, but there are a couple other potential influences here. One is just weight, and that is known as the Gravistat model. I did a weird science monologue podcast on this. So where this came out of, this is a research group out of Sweden. They basically took rats and they implanted weights in their bellies, and they had them like walk around, live their life. And they found that the rats lost the same amount of weight that was implanted. And they thought like, is this like the bones sensing additional weight that's signaling to the brain to eat less and move more so they lose the weight? And this ultimately spawned a bunch of studies where humans were wearing weighted vests for like 8 hours, 12 hours, more hours per day. Didn't really pan out on weight loss, but there are changes related to the hormonal signaling out of the bony cells, the osteocytes, that do seem to impact what's happening at the level of the brain with respect to hunger. So not nothing there, but not super strong. There's another sort of regulator that has to do with muscle mass. We call this the aminostat model. And you can think about this as like a thermostat, but for protein. So the body's really defending against loss of protein or gain of too much protein, defending lean mass levels. There's less evidence for this at the top end, like the body preventing, you can't gain any more muscle. But there's certainly some evidence about loss of lean mass. And what we see here is that when people stop losing weight, for example, and they start eating more calories, whether it's spontaneously or through a concerted effort, we think that they're trying to restore lost lean mass. That's the idea behind this protein leverage theory, this aminostat sort of model. But instead, what they actually do is they restore a lot of fat mass instead. which leads to the overwhelming influence on kind of body weight, body fatness regulation. We call this the Lipostat model. This has the most evidence of any of these three sort of regulators, wherein body fat is this active endocrine organ. It's constantly sending signals to the brain to say, hey, look, do we have a lot of energy on board or not enough? And so the idea is that if someone's losing enough body fat, that once they get close to this lower threshold, which again is genetically mediated, varies amongst individuals, sends a signal to the brain and say, hey, look, man, you got to stop moving as much and you got to start eating more, defending against further fat loss. And then at the upper end, body's full, energy stores are full. You should reduce energy intake and move more. Although we think that the environment maybe overcomes that signal. And that's effectively the root cause of obesity if we had to reduce it down. I think to answer this, that weight and body fat are linked. It's really difficult to lose weight or lose body fat without losing any weight. That's challenging. And so I think, they're both tied together. The Venn diagram, there's a lot of overlap in the middle. But I think that most of the sort of set point and sort of interventions that the body takes on as a result of getting closer to those sort of thresholds or set points is mostly due to body fat versus straight up body weight. But I think they're all involved. Probably protein to the least amount, weight to the second least amount, and then the most is going to be body fat.
Yeah, I do not have the amount of expertise with these kind of specific areas of research, but having listened to a lot of the general discourse around them in the scientific community over the years, and then kind of your own deep dives into this, I am unsurprisingly inclined to agree with many of your thoughts here. So it is a super interesting topic. You're right that these things are super complex, interrelated. On my end, part of the reason why I think I have the approach that I do here is like I'm ultimately the vast majority of the time operating as a clinician here. And so it's like when I'm thinking clinically, it's like, okay, here's the patient in front of me. What interventions or how can I help them? What do I have available to me? And, these models, while very interesting, are not currently immediately applicable to like what I do with a patient. They're like interesting in an explanatory way, but I'm not sitting patients down and suggesting that we implant like lead weights into their abdomen to facilitate weight loss, as interesting as such an idea might be.
Not yet. We'll see. We'll see if that Gravistat model takes off. Weighted vest for everyone. All right, hopefully you enjoyed that as much as I did. Now, this preview is just a glimpse into what our Barbell Medicine Plus subscribers are getting every month. If you found this level of technical breakdown and clinical skepticism valuable, you can join our community and get access to the full version of this episode, along with our specialized action plans for longevity, nutrition, training plateaus, and more, not to mention ad-free listening, early access to episodes, and exclusive product discounts. Our 25% off annual membership sale is currently live, but it ends this Sunday at midnight Pacific time. Check the link in the description to secure your discount and join the members who are using this high-level science to level up. We'll catch you next week and every week right here on the Barbell Medicine Podcast. You've probably noticed that we're doing more ad reads lately to keep the lights on and the microphones powered up. But if you want to skip all of this and get straight to the science, you should check out Barbell Medicine Plus. It's our premium subscription that lets you listen to the show entirely ad-free. Beyond just skipping the ads, you also get early access to all of our new episodes and product launches, plus exclusive content that does not go out on the main feed. And on top of all that, you get exclusive discounts, like 10% off all of our programs, 15% off consultations, and 25% off courses and seminars, all while supporting the work we do here at Barbell Medicine. My favorite part is the direct line, our monthly Ask Us Anything, where you can ask Austin and I your specific questions. Trust me, it's a lot more efficient than trying to hunt us down in person or by sliding into our DMs. And it costs about the same as a cup of coffee each month. And look, I know what a good bag of beans costs these days, but really we're talking about a very reasonable investment here. Plus, the first month is only $1, so there's basically zero risk in trying it out. To join, head over to barbellmedicine.com/plus and sign up today. That's barbellmedicine.com/plus. We really appreciate the support. Now, let's get back to the show.